Roller coasters are truly an insane feat. We went from chucking people down Russian ice slides into launching people at 150 miles per hour and twisting in and out of multiple inversions. But how did we get there? How do we push beyond what we thought was possible? We did it through engineering. Now, some of you may think engineering is like becoming Iron Man and hammering metal into a supersuit in a cave, whilst others may think that engineering is fixing a broken car on the motorway. And you wouldn't be wrong, but to me, the most important definition of engineering actually comes from Wikipedia. The practice of using natural science, mathematics, and the engineering design process to solve problems within technology, increase efficiency and productivity, and improve systems. And whilst that definition has a lot of words, only two are really important. Solve problems. This then leads to the next question. What problems do you need to solve to design a roller coaster? While some of you may jump straight into designing the layout, you'd be jumping the gun. The first and arguably most important step of designing a roller coaster is the consultation. In this consultation, the engineers would be working alongside the marketing, finance, and creative teams to come up with the basic concept. This is because engineering isn't just a free-for-all. Engineers are guided by constraints, which in this case are budget, space, and audience. Budget is a mostly obvious one. The larger the budget, the bigger the roller coaster. However, that isn't always the case. Sometimes parts will be able to get cheaper, but grander roller coasters by using off-the-shelf layouts from less expensive manufacturers. You also have the opposite case, where the ride in general is quite small or mediocre, but it has one really innovative element that had to be worked on by a larger manufacturer, such as Intamin or Macro rides. Space is also quite simple. Whether it's limited by local restrictions, footprint, or terrain, you must work with what you have. An example of this is Nemesis at Alton Towers. To ensure the train would go around the layout, the lift hill needed to be really tall. However, Alton Towers are not allowed to build above tree height to ensure that their rides wouldn't affect the local landscape. So instead, they dug down. They quite literally blew up the area, creating pits and valleys for the tracks to dive in and out of, and moved the leftover rocks to Katanga Canyon to theme up that area. Not only did this solve the space issue, but it created natural theming and made the ride more iconic. Finally, your audience determines your ride experience. Now, whilst you may think roller coasters are for everyone, you'd actually be ignoring one of the main principles of business, which is having a specific target audience. This would mean identifying exactly who your customer is and satisfying their needs. We can explore this through the example of a kiddie coaster. Now, this may seem like a fairly obvious example. Your target audience is a child, right? Whilst the ride itself is meant for children, the people who will be buying the tickets are the parents. So we need to think about the factors that will affect them. Is the theme non-violent? Is the throughput high to avoid long queues? Is the height restriction low to allow all the family to enjoy? So, we have all the parameters. Now we need to design the track. Roller coasters are essentially a system of energy transfers, converting back and forth between kinetic and potential energy. However, throughout the layout, some of the energy will be lost from the system due to friction, converting the kinetic energy to thermal energy. This means that we have to have the large elements at the start of the ride, unless you want to add energy back into the system through an additional launch or lift hill. However, this adds another issue, which is pacing. If any of you have ever attempted to write a piece of fiction, then I'm sure you'll have heard of the 3-act story structure. But if not, here's a quick rundown. You start with the inciting incident, something that sets off what will happen in the rest of the story. And as the story goes on, the tension builds up until you reach the big climactic moment. This is typically where the big fight happens, as the tension hits its peak before resolving in the conclusion. This is a proven method of storytelling that has been seen time and time again. But why is it important? Well, if you want your roller coaster to be an experience rather than just a quick hit, you need to incorporate storytelling. However, it directly contrasts with the earlier problem of friction. We can't have some big massive element at the end if the roller coaster has no energy left. So what do? We cheat. 13 starts out overall quite mellow. It has a few hills here and there, but it could be mistaken as quite a peaceful ride, till its final section. You're brought up a lift hill and into a room where suddenly, the door shuts behind you. The floor creaks, and you're dropped 5 feet into darkness. That's our climax. And whilst that is a fantastic example, not every park. And whilst that is a fantastic example, not every park has the budget to afford to just chuck a drop track at the end of their coaster. But do not fear, for there's this little thing called augmented dynamics. Big words, I know, but rather a simple concept. It's basically how your perception of a ride can be affected by what's surrounding it. One way of doing this is placing theming close to the ride to increase perceived speed, or further away to decrease perceived speed. This is because riders more accurately judge their speed when reference points are closer. Think about when you're driving. It looks like you're moving really quickly when you look at the trees close to the road, whereas when you look at the fields far away, it's like you're gently cruising. 13 also does this at the end of the ride, after the drop track. The darkness makes everything feel a bit more manic, and at points, it feels like you're going upside down as you have no sense of direction whatsoever. Finally, you need to theme the ride. While some of this was done when working out the layout, there'll still be other key points of theming. Do you remember before when I said about the inciting incident? It might have been slightly misleading. You see, you may have thought that that's where the build-up started, but in reality, it started long before you sat in your seat. God, I sound like Abby Emmons. In reality, it starts the moment you set foot in the area. What you see, what you hear, heck, even what you've eaten affects your experience on the ride. So, if you want to hear about a park that does it the best, you should watch my video on Plantageland.